So let's cover design brief basics. So what is a design brief? A design brief helps to capture the key details of a project. This is to ensure that the client or stakeholders and designer both agree and understand what is required. It should include information about the client and brand. And if no brand information is available, this can be made part of the deliverables. It should include the goals and objectives, target market and audience information, and if available, a single persona or multiple personas. And the project deliverables required should be stated, for example, a high-fidelity prototype, and, if possible, budget and schedule. So there is a design brief prepared for this course, which you can download. We have a made-up company or client called VoiceLater LLC for this course or class, and there is some information about the client, but there's no brand identity, so we can be as creative as we like, or you can be as creative as you like. We have our goals and objectives, target market and UX persona, although there is no set UX persona, so we will design for the target market. Our key deliverables will be an XD document with voice commands, so that will be a VUI, and it will be for iOS. There is no set schedule or budgets for this design brief. And then we also have some mood board and inspiration examples, as well as resources to help with our design. So let's cover user flow diagram basics. A user flow is used to map out part of a user journey. It's similar to a task flow, although it allows you to branch out and show user decisions. It helps to determine your user's objectives and your objectives if there are any. It determines users' entry and starting point. Identify what information your users need and when. And when you map out a user flow, use common flowchart symbols, for example, a start and end symbol, a decision symbol, and a process symbol. And it's important to gather feedback and iterate as needed. Right, so now that we've gone through our design brief and understand what we need to proceed, we will move on to creating a flowchart for our app. Just go over our goals and objectives again. We need to design a standard calculator app for iOS users with near vision impairment. And we need to make the calculator more intuitive and accessible by integrating a VUI. We'll proceed by creating a flowchart to map out the user flow for our app, keeping these goals and objectives in mind. So let's start by using the artboard tool, dragging out an artboard, and then once we have our artboard, we can name our artboard flowchart. We'll give our flowchart a heading or title. We'll just call this VoiceLater App User Flow. Now the text is rather tiny. I'll just use the select tool, and with the select tool I can grab out my text, and that will increase the size of my text. See, it's voice ULate. Let's just correct that, VoiceLater App User Flow. Right, so that's the heading or title. Now with the XD, you can design your own flowchart from scratch. So let's just try and do that. Let's just create a rectangle, select the text tool, type rectangle and start typing. Let's call this onboarding screen. And as this is a starting point, we will make this a rounded rectangle. And then we can add our arrows or flows. So we can use the line tool, select the line tool, draw a line, and then select the polygon tool, and then create a little arrowhead. Just move that around, hold down Shift. How we can proceed by creating our user flow. But there's an easy way, and that is by using plugins. So let's switch to the plugins panel. A plugin I will use is Whiteboard. So to install Whiteboard, you simply go to the Discover Plugins button, select that, and then you can search for Whiteboard, and you'll have the option to install Whiteboard. It's a free plugin, and it's a visual collaboration plugin for Adobe XD, which allows you to ideate remotely and in person. So I already have this installed, so let me just select that plugin, and I will choose the Whiteboard option. You can also start drawing, but I won't be drawing. I'll simply use the Whiteboard. And then you're presented with templates for brainstorming, many sort of brainstorming templates, drawing templates, flowcharts, mind map, team management. But we are going to go with flowcharts. But I won't be using the template, I'll be using elements. So I'll select the elements tab, and then I will go down to flowchart elements, and I will start my flowchart by selecting a status or block. I simply select once. I'll zoom in again, and here I can start creating my user flow by simply using this plugin. I can give it a color, but I won't be changing the color. I will leave it as black for now. On the label, I simply select the label and give it a name. So this will be onboarding screen. Now I can see that if I see that my text is going to start overflowing, I can simply deselect, select the entire element, and with responsive resize set to auto, I simply drag and how wide I want my button to be. So I want it about that wide, and I can select the text, or I can hold down Control, and I can select that, and that will select my label, and I can move it to about the center of the block, text block. If I'm finicky about the sizing, I can also just type in the size I want, say I want 260, and I can press enter, and then I can once again just move that around until it's centered. And then next up, and if I select the element, the plugin is aware that this is one of the elements from the plugin, and I can still change the swatch if I need to. So I'll just go on the back arrow of elements and choose another element. I want a connector that goes straight, so I'll choose that one. I'll hold down Shift and I will move it down like that, center it there, and then I can go on to my next element. I can give it a color if I want. I'll leave it as black. Next, block in our user flow will be the calculator UI screen. So let's add that to our flowchart. So I'll select that element for a block. And this will be a calculator user screen where we can add our inputs, calculator input. So it's calculator block action, and I will give this the name calculator US screen, and then I will deselect. I'll select the entire element, and I will use the responsive resize to get the sizing I want. I will leave it at 260. Double click the label or use command click to select the label and center that. Select the entire element again by deselecting, selecting once, and that is the next element of my flowchart. So I can go back to the plugin to choose another flowchart connector. Next up will be a decision. Do I want to have use the voice input or stick to the button input? So let's have our connector to show this as part of the user flow. So if I hold on Alt and select that connector, I can simply duplicate it and drag it down. Let go, and I've duplicated that. And I will add a decision symbol. So I'll select the decision symbol, move that down to about there. And then the decision will be voice input. And then I'll have my decision yes or no. So we'll use a flowchart connector with a turn to add a yes and no. So I'll simply select that once, move that over here, and go back to my elements. And now I want to add a label on top of this connector. So I can either choose this and remove the frame, or I can choose the label, a ghost element label here from the mind map element. That fits perfectly right there. And I'll say yes. That will be one of the flows, and I will simply select this connector, hold down Alt, move it across, and then going to my property inspector, I will use the flip horizontal transform, and that will flip it over. I will select my label, hold down Alt, move it over, let go, and I will simply get that to center about there. And then I will select no. And as you can see, if I move my elements around, I get these helpful little guides in cyan and magenta. That way I know that I'm lining my things up correctly. So now I have my decision symbol. Next, I will do the flow for no and the flow for yes. So if the voice input is not selected, then we will stick to the button input. So let's duplicate this block, hold down Alt, drag it over there, center it about there, and call this button input. And then if a user inputs his calculation, he will have a result. So let's add that end for that user flow. So let's choose the flow chart connector, straight arrow, hold down Alt, select that, drag it to below there, and then let go of the mouse and let go Alt, and now I have my connector again. Next, I want to have my end of this flow. where the user does not use voice input. So that's a end. So let's go to the rounded rectangle. Choose that, hold down Alt, click and drag, and then align that, and we can say display result. Right. So that's the user flow for a standard calculator. So if the user chooses to switch to the voice input, we can show that flow. So let's duplicate this one, hold on Alt, click and drag to there and say show VUI screen. So the user will have the voice user interface screen. And then the next action will be a speech input. So let's duplicate. We'll need a connector. So let's duplicate this connector. You can duplicate any connector, but let's just duplicate that one, drag it across by holding Alt. And then we can duplicate this block. Hold down Alt, click and drag, and then name this speech input. Right. And then lastly, the user will receive the result with voice feedback. So let's duplicate this connector, hold down Alt, click and drag, and then we can add the final or the end of this flow. Let's take this one, hold on Alt, click and drag, and then say display result, but with voice feedback. And then we select by holding, we can hold down Control and select just that rectangle, and we can size it. So this is not responsive resize, but we're resizing that rectangle directly, and I want it about that size. And I'll center my text. Right, so that is our user flow, and we are ready to share this with our stakeholders. And we will cover sharing later, but for now we'll skip ahead to the lo-fi prototype. So with our user flow completed, next we'll move on to the wireframing step in our app design process. This is also known as lo-fi prototyping. So a wireframe is a 2D illustration of an interface. It displays the user flow between screens and pages visually and helps to clarify the way information is displayed, as well as determine the function of UI elements. It also makes the decision to allocate space depending on priority easier, and when designing a wireframe, rarely use colors, stick to black, white, and gray tones, and only use generic fonts and a maximum of 2 generic fonts. So now that we have our user flow complete and signed off, we can move on to the lo-fi prototype, which will essentially be this based on the user flow. So if we refer back to the design brief, if I hold down space, I can navigate around my workspace. And if we look at our key deliverables, we need a wireframe XD prototype, and it should be designed at screen size iPhone 10. So let's start by adding our iPhone artboard. So we can start on our lo-fi prototype. Select the artboard tool, and then choose iPhone 10, 10s, 11 Pro, and that will place our artboard right next to our VoiceLater app user flow. So we can always reference that as we go along. Right, so first up is our onboarding screen. If I go to ellipse tool I think I'll start by adding my branding. So I have the ellipse tool selected. I'll add my logo, give it the name logo by selecting the type tool and then typing logo. And then if I can either select off the artboard or press escape to stop typing. And I can now position my text in the center. If I select both elements, I can group it. So I select both by holding Shift, and I can go Command G or Control G to group. So if I look at my layers panel, I have these two elements. I'm simply going to group them by saying Command G, Control G. And now I have a group, and I can name this group logo. Right. Next, I will add the name of the app, VoiceUlator. So I want to center this text, center line. So I go to my property inspector, select center line. Then I will select the selector tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I will place that about there. I will resize by dragging down on this handle to about that much. And then I will add the tag line, go back to my type tool, keyboard shortcut T for text, and type okay, so that's off canvas. So I want to change the way this is displayed. So I can switch my text frame to either, which it is currently, it's auto width. I'll change it to auto height. I can also have it as a fixed size, but I'll choose auto height. And if I drag my handle, I can have it adjust automatically depending on the height. And I'll select the handle at the bottom. Now with auto height, it will automatically switch to fixed size. I want to switch back to auto width so I can use this handle and have it about that size and place it right under there. So as we've covered in Lo-Fi Prototype Basics, we want to stick to black, white, and gray and generic type. Right. So next up, as this is the onboarding screen, we'll need some instructions. So I'm simply going to duplicate this by holding down Alt, dragging it to about there, and maybe making it a little smaller, and then giving the instruction. Right, so that's the first set of instructions. And then I'll center this and I'll add the rest of my text. Right, so that's the instructions for the app. We're going to be using a microphone symbol and a plus minus symbol on the Lo-Fi prototype to indicate the two options. Next, we'll add a button. So I'll select the rectangle tool, draw a button about this size, and then round it off maybe. About there, and then select the type tool, select anywhere in beside the rectangle and say got it. Right, so that's the instructions on the onboarding or the onboarding screen complete. I'll just make this a little tinier. Right. So this is the lo-fi prototype, and I've got the sizing about how we want it. And then we can move on to the, if we refer back to our user flow, the calculator screen. So we can duplicate this artboard. And before we do that, let's just also name our artboard. So this will be the wireframe. And to duplicate the artboard, I simply select the artboard and then Command D, or hold down Alt and drag it across. And we will call this calculator. As I won't be using any of these elements on this page, I'll simply, under the layers panel, select all the elements and then hit backspace or delete. Now, this will be a standard calculator screen, so we will need our buttons made up of 4 columns and 5 rows. So let's just create a standard size button about that size, and we can add our numbers on the lo-fi prototype. But as it's a lo-fi prototype and we don't need to add as that much detail, we can go without buttons, without the numbers inside on our buttons. So we will repeat this in 4 columns, 5 rows. Easiest way to repeat elements is by using repeat grid. So we go to the property inspector, choose repeat grid. That gives you an indicator that this element is now repeatable. So we'll simply drag our handle out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and in between each element you have these magenta handles, so you can size how much spacing you want between each element. I'll go for 8, and then I will hold this down, drag it to the center and bring it to about there, and then I want to have this go all the way down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about there. And I have the edges of this element showing. I don't want that to be part of this, so I'll drag it over. And then once I'm happy with my buttons, I will simply ungroup grid. As I don't have any plans to keep making changes to this grid, to keep adding to this grid, I will ungroup the grid. And on the layers panel, I can see I've created all these ellipses. I will group it by going Command G, as it's already selected. And I can name this group. And now usually a calculator has a big 0. So we will delete this ellipse over here. So we'll use the rectangle tool. Come over here and create a rectangle about that size. Hold down Command and select that ellipse, delete that ellipse. And select on the layers panel, select the rectangle, and I can show it keyboard shortcut Command, comma, and I will simply drag that little handle to round it off completely. And that is my calculator. Next, I'll add my calculator text. I'll just add a 0. And this is set the text frame set to auto width. So I will hit escape. and that allows me to drag the handle as big as I want it. Let's just escape V, and that's going to go about there. Next up, I want to add a icon symbol, my microphone symbol. Now, adding icons to your prototypes in XD, there are a few ways. If you're on a Mac, you can install SF symbols. You visit the SF symbols page on developer.apple.com. A link is on the design brief. You can download the app SF symbols, and that allows you to use the symbols library that is part of this San Francisco font, system font. Once you've installed SF symbols, you can use it to drag elements or copy paste symbols that you want to use. In this case, I can use the search feature on SF symbols app, and I can search for mic, and that gives me microphone options. Alternatively, if you're using Windows, there are other options. If you go to nucleoapp.com, you can download the free app, and they have free and premium icons. And this would be the Nucleo app. Once it's installed, you can simply copy and paste icons that you like. Alternatively, inside XD, you can also install the Icons for Design plugin. It's one of the plugins. There are other plugins to install. This is a popular plugin, and you can search for any icon you want. So I'm looking for a microphone. I just type mic, and I can get options from different libraries. But as I'm designing for iOS, I'm going to go ahead and use SF symbols. And I want to use the mic circle full symbols. I'll simply select that, Command copy, copy symbol, Command C on Mac, and paste. And this is a text symbol, and it's all dependent on the font family you choose. Now it's showing up as Helvetica New 20. I'll switch this to a auto width, and I can adjust the size of this. I'll make it about 40 pixels high. I'll align it to about there. And that is my mic symbol for my lo-fi prototype. To switch to the VUI screen, I will just adjust this to about there. Right. So that's the calculator screen. So let's refer back to our user flow. Next, we'll do the flow for if a voice input is selected. So we'll design the VUI screen next. So simply duplicate this screen by holding it on Alt and dragging over, or Command or Control D. As I won't be using any of these elements, I will delete them. I will keep the symbol as a reference for where to place the next symbol. So I'll select that symbol. I'll go back to SF symbols. And I will choose something to represent the calculator for now as a placeholder. So I'll choose plus, something with a plus and minus. and I'll choose the plus minus circle fill icon. I'll select that, Command copy, Command V. I'll switch this to auto width in the property inspector, drag it to about there and drag it up to the same size, 40, drag it over, and that's about the right same size, and I'll delete the old symbol. Next, I want to add some visual feedback that this is the voice user interface or VUI screen. So I'll go to the text tool, keyboard shortcut T, and I'll type listening. I will make this a little smaller, about that size. Place that about there. And that is to indicate that this is the VUI screen. Right, so next, if I go back to the user flow, I want to indicate speech input. So let's duplicate this screen again, and I will name this calculator VUI, and I'll duplicate this, Command D or Control D, and then I will, for example, the user can ask 2 plus 2 equals, so I'll indicate the user saying 2 plus 2 equals, and I will change the size of this to about that size. Keyboard shortcut V to change this to select, and I will bring down the opacity on what the user has added, just as a reference to indicate that's what the user has requested. And then I will duplicate by holding Alt and then adding the answer. I'll make it bigger and bring up the opacity again. This is to indicate that this is the feedback or the answer. Right, and I'll have that about right aligned. We can also switch from the VUI back to the calculate screen, so we'll add that. So we'll simply duplicate the calculator screen, hold down Alt, move it over, and then add the total 4. So that's to indicate that you can do the same calculation on the calculator screen. So now that we have our design done, we're going to wire this up as a low fidelity prototype. So to do that, we'll switch to prototype mode. So we'll go to the top left in the application toolbar, and then we will select our first artboard, and we will set this as our first artboard by, if I zoom in, Command plus. I can also choose to use the zoom tool, and I can select that home. That will make that the start of my flow, and I can give this a name, lo-fi. I'll simply call it lo-fi for now, and then I can wire each artboard up by simply using this arrow and selecting the artboard, or I can wire up an element. So in my design, I did not group this button, and as this is a button, I should group it. So let me just, I can do it from prototype mode, but I'll switch back to design mode, and I'll simply group this and call it button. And I'll switch back to prototype mode, and now I have the arrow on my button, And when a user selects that, they will proceed to the calculator screen. So I will grab that handle and move it to the calculator screen. And on the calculator screen, the user can calculate as usual, and that will display a result. But we won't be prototyping the calculator for now. We will be prototyping the voice user interface, or VUI. So let's wire up the symbol and have that linked to the next artboard. And as I keep adding my links in the property inspector, it will show the sort of trigger. So I will have a tap trigger, the same for the button. The type will be, for now, it will be a transition. It will show the destination and the animation type, just dissolve. And this is going to be repeated. This is the very standard or default transition. And next up, I want to have this automatically transition to the result. Drag that. Instead of a tap trigger, I'll switch this to a time trigger and have it transition in about 1 second. As we won't be adding the voice user interface just yet, we just want to share this for review. And then this symbol to connect to the calculator screen with the result. So I'll grab that handle, drag it over, and that will set a tap transition, a tap trigger with a transition and dissolve. And we will go over the types of transitions and animations later. And on this calculator screen, I would like to switch back to the VUI if I need to. So I'll grab the mic symbol, drag it over, and that will set the same settings as before. Right, so that should be my prototype wired up. I'll select the first output in my prototype, and I'll choose desktop preview, and then I can test my user flow. So on the onboarding screen, I select got it. That takes me to the calculator screen. And from here, I can choose to switch to the VUI screen. And on the VUI screen, the user will give a voice command and receive the visual feedback. And later we will add the audio feedback. And on the screen, the user can continue to calculate or switch back to the calculator screen. So we will select that symbol to switch back to the calculator screen, and we have large text, which is part of the goals and objectives of our design brief. So we've successfully wired up our prototype. Next, we should be able to proceed with sharing for review. So once you have your Lo-Fi prototype ready and you'd like to receive feedback from stakeholders, you can share your XD prototype for review. And to do that, you define a starting point by selecting the home icon of the first artboard. And then you ensure that your prototype is wired correctly. Then when you're ready to share, under share mode, or you switch to share mode, and then you select the design review preset. And once you've determined you have the correct link access, you can share your design with stakeholders for review. Right, so now that we've wired up our prototype, we're ready to share for review with stakeholders. But let's just cover sharing quickly. So with XD, you can share multiple flows. If I switch to the share screen or share mode, I have my home artboard set on this onboarding screen and I've wired up my prototype. So that is my flow for the lo-fi prototype. If I create more flows and I set a home on them, I can create multiple flows and share them individually. But let's switch back to the design screen, because it's also possible to have a selected flow. So say I choose to share the flow, including the flow chart. So I can either by holding down select, drag all my artboards, and then simply select that, and that will create a new share. And if I select that, I have automatically created a flow, and I can give that link a name and choose my view setting. So it's design review, development, presentation, user testing, or custom viewing experience. I'll leave it as design review. And my link access I can set to anyone with a link, only invited people, anyone with a password. So now I have multiple flows. I can, if I select flow 1, I can give it a name here, and that will give, and I can create a link for that flow. If I select lo-fi, I can also give that a name and create a link for that flow as well. I'll be sharing both the flowchart and the lo-fi prototype for review. So let's give this a name. Let's call it, and I can share that with stakeholders. But I will be sharing the lo-fi prototype, so I will call that Voicelator Lo-Fi. Or if I go back to prototype mode, I'll simply call this Voicelator Lo-Fi. Switch back to share mode, and that will, and as you can see, the link name is also updated. Alternatively, if I go back to prototype mode and I select desktop preview, there's the button to the option to record on Mac. And if I choose record video, I can record the prototype and share the video for review as well by selecting the record button. And I also have options to enable the microphone and show notifications. I can also preview on device, but we will do that later in the course. And also when doing a selected share, as you can see, that has automatically wired up the artboards and set the transition, and animation is dissolved. Right, so let's share our lo-fi prototype for review. We'll select Voicelator Lo-Fi, set it to view setting to design review, and our link access will be anyone with the link. Ideally, you will want to be more secure and only invite people, but we will have anyone with the link set as the link access. So I'll select create link. There are other options such as embed the code and beyond. So we'll cover that later in the course or class. Right, so with that link copied, I'll send it over to the stakeholders for review. If a stakeholder opens up that link, they will be presented with the prototype in their browser. And here in review mode, they can click through the prototype, or they can page through the prototype. But let's click through the prototype, and they can experience the prototype as you wide it out. There's also the option to, by going to the top left, view the screens in a grid or tile mode. and they can choose a screen to go to that way as well. They can make a comment, for example, by using this place a pin. They can choose anywhere on the prototype to make a comment, and they can leave a comment. And also, if the stakeholder prefers to already start testing a prototype, they can choose to go into full screen mode, and here they can test the prototype without any distractions. And that is an overview of Share for Review.